really not trying to roast Cam Johnson. And I apologize if the Pelicans take Cam Johnson because y'all are not going to want him now.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Big Easy Sports Talk podcast. My name is Nick Garisco, and I'm here with Michael Pelichan. Guys, the NBA draft is next week, so we have a special guest on today's episode, Richard Stayman. He's an NBA draft analyst who writes for MavsDraft.com. He can be found at MavsDraft on Twitter. This guy is a Mavs fan, but he is the real deal. He's very sharp. And we are thrilled to have him on today. He's going to be breaking down his top 20 players in the NBA draft.
Richard, thanks so much for coming on, man. And the first question that we have for you, and this is a question that I really can't get away from, is how good do you think that Zion Williamson is going to be in the NBA?
So thank you for having me on. First, I want to say I'm high on Zion. Like I think he's a surefire star. You don't find guys with his athleticism combined with his awareness. He has ball handling skills, his touch around the rim. I thought no one would ever be better at the touch around the rim than Marvin Bagley. And here we are. Zion has even better touch, even despite being undersized. There's just so little that really is wrong with him. Even his jump shot, which is his biggest concern, that's all fixable, I think. I think it's not broken. His elbow, doesn't really have like crazy movement outside, I just think he has nothing wrong in his game, and it's really rare to see. I'm not sure he's not sure he's the next LeBron or something. I'm very conservative about my comparisons and everything like that. But I mean, he's going to be probably close to a generational talent.
Yeah. And it's funny too, like it's hard for me to, I don't know. He's one of those people who's really hard for me to project just because he's so different from most prospects that come through, but we're certainly excited about him. And we don't just have questions about Zion because we're in a sort of weird position, and I'm sure you know this already because of just being privy to whatever media is out there. But we could have a pick. We could have pick 4. We could have pick 3. We could have pick 9. We could have pick any of the Celtics picks. It's sort of a weird position for us. So what we'd like to do is we'd actually like to go through your mock draft 1.0, the one that you released on June 7th, and then ask you about all the guys individually. Any other thoughts that you have, just let us know. But we're here to pick your brain on whatever you can provide on these guys. So,
yeah, I mean, let's just keep it on going with number 2 overall. If you assume the Pelicans are going to take Zion Williamson number 1, we have the Grizzlies up at number 2 overall, and they're they seem to be choosing between Ja Morant and R.J. Barrett. Barrett, Where do you think that what direction do you think they're going to go in? And actually, I kind of want to hear what direction you think they should go in, and if those are two different answers.
I am still torn on what Memphis should do for the second year in a row. Last year, Jaren Jackson said he wouldn't work out for Memphis. They still took him. So it makes it really unpredictable. I actually think they will go Ja Morant, but I think they should go R.J. Barrett. Really kind of sophisticated answer, but while yes, you could have Ja as the simple replacement for Mike Conley, I actually like their young point guards already. I know DeLon Wright is a restricted free agent. I'm really high on him. He had a killer end to this season. Even though some of it was empty stats, he looked really good in a full-time role with Memphis. So that's part of it. I think they can easily move on from Conley even without Ja. And also, they really don't have wings for the future. Their only long-term wing they have is Kyle Anderson. And I don't know if I'm comfortable with that. And in a league where, you need as many ball handlers as possible from as many positions as possible, RJ really works. And then you combine that with the fact that they're going to get a good return from Mike Conley, where they could get another point guard if they feel like they really need to address that. So I think they can go just so many directions with it. I think they should go RJ, which I think is an unpopular opinion, but I think he's just more naturally talented than Ja Morant. Ja, has some issues with strength shooting. I think RJ, I think he's more likely to become a great shooter than Ja is, and I think that's ultimately what does it for me.
What do you think about R.J. Barrett as a prospect besides, the things that you've said? Do you think that the inefficiency is something that can be corrected? Do you think it's a function of not having shooters at Duke? Where do you see him becoming as an NBA player?
Yeah, I think it'll be corrected. I'm remembering now. I think it did have a little bit to do with the team around him at Duke. His best shooter was arguably Cam Reddish, who was horribly inefficient. So that never helps when, you don't have anyone to complement your skill set as a driving kick guy. But I think at worst, he really becomes like a Tyreek Evans, despite, outside of the, being suspended from the league and everything, that part probably doesn't apply to him. But in overall skill set, at worst, maybe he's like an empty stats guy that can maybe contribute on a winning team once in a while. For his ceiling, I've been trying to figure that out for the life of me. I think he could become like a Tobias Harris. I think that's where I've ultimately settled on what he could be. And I think that's just a really valuable role nowadays. I mean, he's going to flirt with a max contract this summer, depending on who signs him. So RJ, I really like his outlook in the NBA.
There were a lot of rumors at the beginning of the Anthony Davis trade talks. They were talking about kind of teaming up RJ Barrett if we were to make a deal with the New York Knicks that involves Anthony Davis, and maybe we would get that third pick. And RJ Barrett's also been pretty vocal about wanting to be a New York Knick, and I think he even refused a workout so far with the Memphis Grizzlies. But assuming that these three players, Zion, Ja Morant, and RJ Barrett, go top 3 overall, that kind of leaves the Lakers with a bit of a drop-off in most people's perspective. Everyone's board is going to be different. But it seems like the Lakers don't have a set pick yet here. First of all, they could obviously deal this pick, and it could be to the Pelicans, honestly. But let's say the Lakers stand packed at 4, or even let's say the Pelicans have a pick 4. Who do you expect to go around this range? And who would you prefer if you were the New Orleans Pelicans at pick 4, assuming the top 3 we just mentioned are off the board?
Man, all right. So for the Lakers, I think that Darius Garland's rumor going around is pretty true. I mean, he's a clutch client. I think that's probably, if they keep the pick, who they would take. I don't know if you would ever put on a Lakers uniform regardless. So that's a little bit tricky. They kind of have to think about who they would trade if they end up keeping the pick now. Kind of like, how the Cavs did it for Kevin Love with Andrew Wiggins. But I think 4 is, you're right, there's a big drop-off from Ja Morant or RJ to the next person. Personally, my 4th overall on my board is Jackson Hayes. I think with how raw he is and just how he's only played basketball for a few years and he's a freak athlete, I think he would be worth looking at. You can really develop him as a rim protector. Him and Zion on defense would be unreal. But I mean, he can cover anyone. Really, he can switch off to the perimeter, pick and roll offensively. I really like him as a pick. And then I'm not as high on Jared Culver. I'm actually just finished watching one of his games again because it had been a while. But Jared Culver could be another option as, secondary playmaker if you all keep Drew. Would be a really good complementary piece to him. But other guys I see around there, Culver, Hayes, DeAndre Hunter even. I think he's just a high floor, low ceiling guy. So it depends on what you guys are looking to address on that front. If you guys want to swing for the fences, Hunter's probably not your guy. But I think those are about the 3 guys who I could see in play for number 4.
And as far as Culver goes, I mean, he's someone that I was reading your profile and you had his ceiling at Malcolm Brogdon. So, I mean, can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, certainly Brogdon, again, excellent NBA player, someone that you certainly would want on your team. Maybe not someone that you could ever, I mean, for number 4 pick, that might not be the return that some teams are looking for. What do you see in him that you do not like?
Really, it's only 2 things. I only have 2 major flaws in him, which is his first step is pretty slow. And for a slasher, you kind of, you want them to be able to beat defenders off the dribble. I'm not really sure he can do that. And then also his jump shot is just, he needs a lot of work. In practice, it actually isn't bad. It looks pretty good. But in game, it's flat. It's a really late release. Those are the 2 things that just really hold me back on him. And the reason I put the ceiling on him as Brogdon is you could say the same thing about Brogdon. I remember hearing things about Brogdon, that he can't even shoot off the dribble from the free throw line. Like, how's he going to shoot at the NBA level when he can't, even shoot from the free throw line in college, at least off the dribble? Just really smart player. I think that's ultimately what you're looking at. I don't think he's like a boomer bust guy. I think at worst, I put my comparison on the floor for him as Dante Exum, which obviously it's a little bit loaded because Dante's had injuries to fight, but his jump shot never came along, and plus defender and made $10 million, I think is what his deal is. So if you get Culver in a second pick, like, that's a really good deal if you're getting a guy with that value at number 4.
And can you talk a little bit more about DeAndre Hunter?
So with Hunter, he's a really good athlete. Does not necessarily like explosive, and I'm not sure I trust his shot a ton right now, but it's also part of what Virginia does because I feel like every year I say that about a Virginia player. But I mean, he's just high IQ, excellent defense. Everything checks out on defense. There's really nothing he does wrong. Good frame, really strong, just athletic. He knows how to use it, but his jump shot needs a little bit of tweaking. And he doesn't have a great first step. He doesn't really use his athleticism on offense as much as he does on defense. That's really my only issues, but he's going to step in right away and be one of the best defenders on any team he goes to.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time watching Duke and UNC in college, and if you might not know this about me, I am a Duke fan, and my dad went to Duke, and so I was actually born in Durham, so I'm quite interested in what you have to say about Cam Reddish and R.J. Barrett and of course Zion, who we already talked about, Barrett and Zion, but I'm also interested in Kobe White. Because, you're watching him at UNC, seem to have a pretty good command of the offense. And I just was watching him, and I'm a little surprised, actually, that he's considered a consensus top 10 pick overall. Now, don't get me wrong, he was a great college player, but just watching him before I looked at any mock drafts, I was a little surprised to see him this high. Do you share my thoughts on this? Is this a weaker draft class than usual? Or do you think I'm missing something on White? And feel free, I'm not the analyst you are, so feel free to just go off on me if I'm totally off base on that. But what do you think about White?
I pretty much share the same sentiment. For the longest time, I was trying to figure out what people saw in White. I love his defense, even though he's undersized. I think he is perfect at fighting through the pick and roll, which at his age as a freshman, you don't find. My issue with him is, he has a push shot, which I do not like at all. I'm very particular about jump shots, and that weighs a lot in my mind. So I think it's a lot of a product of just the draft class. I don't think in almost any average draft class he's a top 10 talent. I think right now I have him at 10 on my board just because of how good of a defender I think he can be. And he's very quick. He can use that to his advantage. And I'm sure the NBA spacing will help him a lot. So it's not just, a Duke bias or anything. Like, it's not that. I share the same view, but I still think he can be a good player. I think at best he's kind of a Jeff Teague, which I know I say that negatively, like Jeff Teague was an all-star. But
right.
He kind of screams like high floor, medium ceiling. Just not sure how realistic him hitting the ceiling is for me.
Well, so, you talked about his quickness, too. So just to give you a little bit background on me, I don't watch a lot of college basketball, so my YouTube scouting is essentially what I'm doing for the draft because I just haven't seen a lot of games, and that leaves a lot of gaps. Is Kobe White someone who has, like you said, he's quick? Does he have a lot of straight line speed as well, or is he someone who's more quick than fast?
He has straight line speed, but I'd say he probably is quicker than he is fast, I'd say he's quick. It's actually a really good way. I've never heard that before, but yeah, he's quick. He's more quick than he is fast.
Yeah, and I'm gonna parlay this here. I want to know your thoughts on Cam Reddish. Obviously, Cam Reddish really didn't have the freshman season that a lot of people were expecting. He was very inconsistent for Duke last season, and it just seems like oftentimes he was overshadowed by Barrett and Zion Williamson. And, Cam Reddish, he showed some flashes. Like, there were certain halves of games where he would put it all together, and sometimes he would even look like the best player on the court. And that's saying a lot, obviously, with Duke's athletes there. But for the vast majority of the season, Cam Reddish was the third guy, and he was just a very inconsistent shooter. I know that picking Cam Reddish is going to be mostly about upside, but where do you see him falling kind of in this top 10 range? And also, what teams do you think are interested in Cam Reddish?
So personally, I have Cam Reddish. I'm not big on Cam Reddish. I'm a big believer in eye test way first and then stats. But my issue is he didn't check out on the eye test for me either.
Right.
For me, I think I have Reddish in my 20s. I forgot the exact number. I think it's like 24. Just because
really?
I really don't buy his jump shot either. He's got the low release. It's quick, but it didn't work at Duke. And, he had a lot of catch and shoot opportunities. So that really scares me off. Obviously, he's not a finished product, and I think he can hang around for a little bit. I don't see the upside nearly as much, so I've seen people call him, the next T-Mac. Not a fan of that at all. That's very, very bold. But I think ultimately teams that look at him, I'm stuck on that Hawks fit. I think that's where he's going to end up. I think he probably had great workouts from what we saw with the media. I mean, he's a smooth athlete. Like, there's really not anyone as smooth athletically as him. And he's a really good defender. I like his upside. He's got really good lateral quickness. He reacts quickly. Both things that I think are really important in projecting defensive upside. So those two ends he'll do well. And I'm not convinced he's going to be a secondary ball handler at the NBA. He could probably get a couple assists a game. But I mean, the jump shot inefficiency, shot selection, all of that, those are just big concerns for me.
You've said this on a few guys, and it's something I want to ask you about. You've talked about a low release point. You've also talked about guys and how fairly common it is to fix an NBA shot. So with that in mind, I mean, so fixing an NBA shot can be about efficiency or about the actual motion and how quickly they can get it off. A low release point is going to obviously impede a player's ability to get a shot off against more length. Do you think that they can fix the way that the shot is actually going, or do you think they can only make it to where it's more likely to go in?
Yeah, so I think the core is pretty much what's set in place, but they can tweak like just really minor parts of the release. That's just my belief. So Reddish has that ability. Like it is just in the release. Like if they can, I don't know like the specifics of what they would do, but yeah, I think generally it's like the core of the jump shot is what matters. Their lift, that stuff. I mean, that's just years and years of muscle memory that you can't change. So yeah, just basically how they elevate, how they bring the ball up, things like that. I like Lonzo Ball, is the first to come to mind with that. And I don't think habits like that, like that's extreme, obviously. Yeah. But habits like that, it's just very difficult to change just because of how much muscle memory there is involved in that.
Yeah, and so moving on here, actually, it looks like I've skipped someone, but I want to ask you about P.J. Washington, because he's a guy that he's come up. I actually know less about P.J. Washington than I probably do about all the top prospects, which is weird because he is a Kentucky guy. I mean, what do you see in P.J. Washington?
I'm a big fan. I liked his chances of being a steal last year. I was really excited for him to potentially fall to the Mavs at 33 last year. Sadly, he returned to school and now is looking at a potential top 10 pick. But I love what he brings. He's got really long arms. I think he's 6'8" with like a 7'2", 7'3" wingspan. Can play really 2 or 3 positions. He can play both forward spots, potentially even center, and depending on who the other center is, with the small ball, everyone can shoot now. He's not going to be a rim protector. He's more of, perimeter below the rim defender. But his jump shot improved so much. He's a really good passer, good athlete. Just has a high floor and high ceiling, in my opinion. I really like, and it's not because of the name at all, but I really like him going to the Wizards. Washington to Washington's been my movement I've been trying to start. But I think that's a really good fit for him. And if y'all if say the Pelicans trade, they get a 10th, something 11th, 12th, like late lottery, I think that would actually be prime range for Washington. And his workouts just started last weekend, so he's a guy that might be a late riser.
Yeah, and that makes sense. So we actually have, it's interesting, some of the 3-team trades that have floated around involve Bradley Beal and the Wizards. It's one that seems relatively feasible. I don't know, it's going to be hard without a power structure in place in Washington, but it is something to where we might actually have a pick in that range. And I think that's the top 10 of your mock draft. I know you said that your board is a little bit different. Nick, do you have the recap on that?
Right. I mean, I think we're seeing the top 3 overall being Zion Williamson, Ja Morant, R.J. Barrett. Number 4, pretty interesting. They could go a number of different directions here. I think Richard has them taking Jarrett Culver for now, although that could be subject to change. He mentioned Jackson Hayes at 5, or around pick 5, but also as a possibility for pick 4. He mentioned Darius Garland also as a possibility for pick 4. There's been rumors circulating around that aspect. And then right after that, we mentioned Kobe White. We mentioned DeAndre Hunter for Virginia. We just talked about P.J. Washington around pick 9. And the Atlanta Hawks, potentially taking Cam Reddish around pick 10. So that 7 to 10 range seems to be Kobe White, DeAndre Hunter, P.J. Washington, and Cam Reddish. And now, yeah, you're right. I mean, we just mentioned 10 players, so now we're kind of getting to that 11 range and even closer to the teens. So we're making some good progress here. Richard, who are some guys you like in the early double digits here?
So one of them is someone that is, like everyone else in this class, rather polarizing. I like Sekou. I'm gonna botch his name, so I'm so sorry. But Sekou Doumbouya, I think is how you say it. I watched him at, I forgot what international camp it was. I think it was Basketball Without Borders last year or something like that. Really liked his game. Just he was super young and his athleticism, potential for a jump shot, just all of it. He looks like the raw talent, like just stereotypical raw talent that teams kind of dream of. And he's the youngest player in the draft. The only player close to his age is Talen Horton-Tucker, who I think is a month older than him. So guys like that, I think, are going to get a look very in the middle of the lottery just because of natural upside. He's someone I like a lot. The stats really didn't catch up until recently. I think he was shooting like 40% from three in the last 2 months or something like that, but he still has to work on a lot of his game. He's just a raw talent.
And I've heard something about his motor, and I've actually heard conflicting things, and it's becoming a really big thing for me to look at guys' motors just to see how, what kind of odds do they have of actually reaching their ceilings. I've seen two reports on him that conflict. I've seen one that says he's very hot and cold with his effort, and one that he's a very consistent, hardworking guy, a guy who is obviously he's already playing pro basketball, and someone who could develop into a really, really good high motor player. From what you've seen of, again, I don't know how to say his name either, so of Sekou, do you think that he is a guy who's going to have a high motor, low motor, somewhere in between? What do you think about all that?
I think it's hard to tell when you have, 17-year-olds. Like, I remember when I was 17, like, everyone, you're different. Like, you're so, at the end of the day, we're all human, you're still learning even your own body and everything. Like, you're growing still. He's young and he started the season at 17 years old. So it's really hard for me to judge that. But from what I've seen, it's just inconsistent, which plenty of guys have worked that out. It's just, I think work ethic and motor, they're kind of a little bit different. I've heard the exact same things, that he's behind the scenes. It's all good, which I think translating to the NBA, I think that matters a little bit more. In game, his motor is on and off. But I think it has more to do with his age than anything else.
Okay, so speaking about sort of weird prospects, now we're to Bol Bol, Manute Bol's son. I think it's Manute Bol's son, is it? I think it's his son. And a guy who looks like a walking, I don't know, the thinnest. He looks insane. I was watching footage of him today, and it was kind of almost weird it didn't look real. Like, it looked like it just, I don't know. I don't know how to explain it. But, what do you think about him? Because he's sort of a weird prospect, a guy who has a lot of length in an NBA that prizes length. He moves pretty well. What do you think about him as a prospect?
So I went to Houston in December to see him and Kenny Wooden, who both of them are in the draft. I came out of it not very impressed with either. I still like Kenny Wooden a lot, but that's for a different time. But with Bol, at the 17-minute mark, like, I'd never seen this before from any college player ever. He was winded. So conditioning is a huge aspect of his game, and he's really slow. So I was really just confused as to how much contact he was taking. Like, maybe I was just missing something. But yeah, he really needs to work himself into shape. His motor is not good. He really didn't even try on defense at all. And I understand, college is different. You're not getting paid. There's a lot of outside circumstances. But I'm not sure I buy him. I think he's a really good talent in theory. But just all of it with, his motor, his physical condition, those things just really scare me. And I don't trust bigs with foot injuries, unless it's Embiid, I guess. But for me, it's just I'm not sure I buy into the talent. He's probably the most polarizing player in this draft, though, right? Like,
I say besides Reddish, the Reddish is the only other one that I've seen such diverging opinions. And you were saying, it's interesting, you're saying conditioning. This is, again, all news to me. If he's got conditioning problems carrying no extra weight, how is that just an odd, I don't know, he's just such an odd player at 6'7" or whatever he is, to be that tall and that long, and then to be so skinny. And if he's already having conditioning problems, that seems like a red flag to me, but, we'll see.
Yeah, right. Once he gets in the NBA weight room and he's going to add some weight, it's not the same as getting in like an NFL weight room. They're not going to be trying to pack the poundage on him based on positions, but he's going to be probably doing more, weightlifting and more working out than he ever really has. When you look at him, you kind of tell that's probably obvious, but it's going to be interesting to see if he starts to if he does pack, let's say in the next 2 or 3 years, if he packs 10 more pounds on muscle, because I'm sure an NBA team isn't going to get this guy and say, okay, yeah, you're good on your body size is great, so you don't need to be packing any more muscle. So no, but yeah, that might affect his conditioning as well. But you could also make the argument that getting him an NBA conditioning program will also help there too. But it's never good when these guys are supposed to. I know a lot of these players are young, but at the same time, we all know firsthand probably how more difficult it is to get in shape when you get older. So these guys are supposed to be at the prime of their, maybe not athletic careers, but in terms of being in shape. So it is a little concerning, I would say. But we'll see how he adapts there. Rui Hakamura, and I'm probably pronouncing that wrong, but everybody knows he's the great forward from Gonzaga, and Gonzaga made a good run this year. And I also believe he was there when they went to the championship a couple of years ago. It was either 2 years ago or 3 years ago when they lost to UNC in the championship. But he had a lot of hype surrounding him. I think when the draft process kind of started for a lot of media members, I would say. I'm sure it started for a lot of NBA teams a lot earlier, scouts earlier. But when the media started focusing on the draft and the lottery, this guy seemed like he was going to be a surefire, I would argue, top 7 pick. And now I'm starting to look at more and more mocks, including Richard's here, that have him just outside the top 10. Can you kind of talk about, Richard, why maybe teams appeared more high on him maybe the media seemed more high on him than the actual NBA teams are?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it, he's yet another polarizing player. That's part of, I guess, a weak draft class, but I think a lot of it has to do with, he missed a year of development because I don't think he could even speak English his freshman year. So that didn't help him at all. So, he's still really raw. He broke out this year, which helped a lot. I think that has a lot to do with it, just his overall raw talent, and then how much production he had this year. He was really good, despite really not even having that much skill yet. So I think that's a big part of it. He's a really good athlete. He really has terrible shot selection, which I think that's a very fixable flaw. But I think that's why a lot of it's mixed. Some people are, going off of what they saw this year and, not buying the whole he doesn't speak great English, like he didn't get all the coaching opportunities, but some people do. I think that's ultimately what the difference is on him.
And when you say shot selection, is he someone who projects towards a low usage role in the NBA? And if so, like you're saying, was that the role that he had at Gonzaga? Again, I'm not very well versed in this. So what was his role at Gonzaga, and how is that the same or different than what it's going to be in the NBA?
Yeah, his role at Gonzaga was really awkward because they basically just had him play score, like the scorer role. So he ran in transition a lot. I guess the best way I would describe him is think Jabari Parker with a little bit less skill. That's how they utilize him.
You're not making me excited about him, man.
Well, see, it depends on who you ask, though. See, a lot of people, that's negative. He didn't play very good defense at all.
Jabari is just one of those guys that I thought he would be a lot better than he has been. He's still young enough. I don't mean to hate on him or anything like that. I thought he would pan out to be more than he has been so far, and obviously the injury context also changes things. But okay, so moving on to another guy whose name I'm going to butcher, Goga Bitadze. How do you? I'm going to stop talking. What do you think about this guy?
So Goga is he's got two-way potential. He's a lot different from Sekou in the European role because Sekou is the guy he's really raw. He's all upside. Whereas where Goga he has the high floor. Great touch around the rim, potential to shoot in the NBA, pick and roll on both ends. He projects as a two-way guy. So for him, it's a high floor, high ceiling for a lot of people. I'm not sure I see the ceiling as much. I think he has a good ceiling, but not like people think he could have all-star potential. They have him as number 1 center. Personally, I have him as number 2, but the drop in center is just massive at each spot. I like him a lot. He's not that polarizing actually. So that's kind of rare. So I think that's a big thing for him.
And right now, it seems like you have Goga going in to the number 14th overall pick, which is the Boston Celtics. Obviously, the draft is in a week, so everything's subject to change in any mock draft. I know personally how much things can change in the last week based on, rumors or whatever. But the Celtics are important here, right, Michael? I mean, the Celtics are very important because if a trade is done with Anthony Davis – and we deal AD to the Celtics, then depending on what the package deal is, one of these first-round picks, and they have three of them. They have pick 14 overall, they have pick 20 overall, and they have pick 22 overall. So one of these three first-round picks, maybe even two if they don't offer the players that we really want, may end up being in the Pelicans' hands. So a lot of these names that you're hearing now and for the rest of this podcast are actually pretty important when it comes to the Pelicans, especially if we end up doing a deal with the Boston Celtics. So I want to talk about next two Kentucky prospects here. Keldon Johnson and Tyler Hero. I was watching now again. I only probably watched a couple of Kentucky games. And I'm actually surprised. I'm going to say another one of my opinions that may be substantiated or it may be totally off base. But I was glad to at least get my Kobe 1 right in your eyes here. I'm going to say that I think Tyler Hero, in terms of upside, I actually think he should be going higher than I'm seeing him in a lot of NBA mock drafts. And I'm sure they know a lot more about Tyler Hero than I do and about the players. But I was every time I watched Kentucky this year, I was always very impressed with Hero. And I thought, most importantly, he was hitting some big shots late in games. And as talented as Kentucky was, I thought it was interesting, but also kind of rewarding for him that he was kind of the go-to guy in the late situations there for Kentucky. Do you think that Tyler Hero, who you have going to the Boston Celtics at 22 overall, do you think there's any way that he could go around where you have Keldon Johnson going at 15 overall?
Yeah, I've started to come around on that, especially just given how much has been said about him from high-end media members. So usually they kind of echo what NBA teams are saying. I think ultimately he could even go lottery because he has, for this draft class, there's really no one with his scoring ability at his position that played at that high of a level. So he's got a unique skill set for this draft. I'm not sold on him just because his short wingspan, he's not very quick defensively. So, I mean, you're looking at a guy who he probably is your 6-man microwave kind of guy, but I mean, that's really not a bad thing. Like, that sounds bad to say, like, he's not going to be a starter or something like that, which I'm not eliminating that from the possibilities, but I really just think I don't know what his role would be in the NBA as 6-man. Does he get to run the point at all? What position does he play? Who does he guard? So those are just some of my questions. He's a good player in transition, which is also helpful in, adjusting to tempo really quickly in the NBA. But I mean, as you know, he can score from anywhere. I'm not terribly high on him, mostly because of, the wingspan. The wingspan really scares me. I'm not a fan of guys who are negatives, with few exceptions.
It seems like he's probably a better basketball player than he is athlete at this point. And yeah, he might be kind of a liability on the defensive side of the ball, in the NBA especially. But yeah, he just seems like he's got one of those guys who just has a great personality, smart IQ, great work ethic. I mean, the coaches really rave about him, and he seems like a good team leader. So yeah, in a weaker draft class, I could kind of see him going higher, but we'll see what happens there. How does he compare to Keldon Johnson, the other Kentucky wing?
So with Keldon, I like Keldon's game as a floor almost, and I think he's got an underrated ceiling just because he's still filling in his frame a lot. Like, he needs to add a lot of strength. His jump shot has potential. He needs just minor tweaking, with the release like we talked about earlier. But he's got really good recovery ability on defense. He moves well. He's got decently long arms. So I like Keldon on that end a lot more. I don't know how much better of a scorer he'll be. He can get to the basket at will. It really depends on that jump shot. I put Aaron Aflalo, if you remember him, as my comparison. He was I'd say prime middle tier guy in the NBA, which for me means he can be used in just about any single role and he'll have a long career. Whereas Hero, I think if his defense just gets exposed that badly where he can't ever be a positive, I'm not really convinced, that he'll be in the league for a while. Hero has the offensive skill. Keldon has the defense with, I think, a lot more upside is essentially what it comes down to.
And just out of curiosity, we were talking about the Celtics, and like Nick mentioned, a lot of those picks could be on the table for us if we wind up doing that trade. In this range, because it's going to depend on who's taking them, right? So, I mean, is this range chock full of guys with high upside, or is it full of guys who could immediately step in and be a polished player who might not have that kind of upside, but someone you can rely upon fairly quickly?
Yeah, so I think the 15 to honestly 80 at this point is almost interchangeable the whole way. Like, obviously, there's some drop-offs. It's unbelievably deep. Like, that is something that this draft class does not get credit for. It is a really deep class. The problem is it's not able to show it because there's absolutely no middle depth whatsoever. Like last year, you would talk about guys at 17, 18, 19, 20, whatever, and you'd be like, yeah, this guy's like really good. We're pretty confident in that. This year, I can't say that about anyone in the teens, early 20s. But once you get into the second round, like all those guys are super valuable, value picks. So yeah, I think I think you're getting a mix. For me, on my board in my 20s, I mostly have high upside guys. There's only two guys I have with really high floors, which are Thibault, and I have Brandon Clark as well in my 10 to 20 range.
Yeah, and so actually we're getting up to that in your mock draft. So we have Kevin Porter Jr. and Brandon Clark. I mean, could you talk a little bit about both of those guys?
Yeah, Kevin Porter seems to be sliding. His jump shot is that's really going to hold him back. I don't think the off-court issues necessarily are going to be an issue in interviews. Depends. I mean, that'll never get released or anything. So we never know about that. But he has a really good wingspan. I think it's almost 7 feet. Really good at creating space, like absolutely amazing shot creator. The only one better at him in this class is Garland in that regard. So he's kind of boom or bust to me. That jump shot he has Alonzo-esque hitch, which really scares me off as we covered. And then Brandon Clark, complete opposite. Super high floor, but I think he's almost, I don't know how to say this without it coming across the wrong way, but I think he's almost at his career peak. I think he's going to be this kind of guy, and it's not a bad thing, but he's going to be that kind of guy for like 5, 6, 7 years. He's just not going to be, I don't think he's going to be a guy where you see crazy progression as his career goes along, but he won't ever be terrible because his square frame that really scares me off, especially for a shot blocker.
Yeah, and just to recap real here, I mean, we're talking about picks 14 really through 22 because the Boston Celtics own 3 of those, and one of those or 2 of those, you never know, maybe even all 3 might be in the possession of the New Orleans Pelicans if Anthony Davis is traded to them. Again, we've mentioned Goga. I'm not even going to try to pronounce his last name. We mentioned Keldon Johnson, Kentucky wing, Kevin Porter Jr., guard out of USC, Brandon Clark, forward from Gonzaga. We've also mentioned Rui Hachimura out of Gonzaga there. The last 3 that you have in your top 20, I would say for now, Lewis King out of Oregon, and then Talen Horton-Tucker, guard out of Iowa State, and Nasir Little, forward out of North Carolina. Who's your favorite of this bunch?
Well, my pinned tweet is bold, and I'm backing down a little bit from it, but I think he'll be a steal. And I'm not confident anymore that he'll be top 20, but it is Lewis King. Personally, to me, everything that people see in Cam Reddish is what I see in Lewis King. The shooting upside, his stroke is absolutely beautiful. Really long, good athlete. He's needs a little bit of work defensively. That's where they change, and ball handling not as good, but he could be a 3-and-D guy, really good in transition. Didn't get a chance to show it because Oregon played. So there's 360 something Division I teams. They played at the 330 something ranked offense in terms of pace. So they were unbelievably slow, which obviously really doesn't help offense, like, transition athletic players. So he didn't get to showcase his ability at all. And a lot of times they're like, here, do something with the ball with 5 seconds left. So he didn't get nearly as much production as he should have, just simply because of the offense they ran. So I think he's a guy who's completely hidden. Still has some work to do. There's been questions about his body language in game, but I mean, when you're in that kind of situation, you're completely misused. I understand it. So Lewis King is my favorite, and then the next one would be Talen Horton-Tucker. As I mentioned earlier, He is the second youngest player in the draft. He's going to be 18 till Thanksgiving. So that's almost 2 full months of the season. He played actually the first month of college season as a 17-year-old, which only one other player to my knowledge did, which was Kyra Lewis, who you'll hear in the lottery next year. But Taylor Horton-Tucker, he's a really good shot creator, ball handler, excellent finisher at the rim. He's 6'4" with a 7-foot wingspan. Probably one of the most awkward-looking guys I've ever seen because of that. But, I mean, NBA teams, all that matters is the length. They don't really care, about that. So there's a lot of upside with him. His jump shot needs consistency. It's part shot selection, part form. But yeah, I think Taylor Horton-Tucker's another guy who he's polarizing. I was down on him. I saw him in person, got to see him right up front, and he's got the skill. I mean, for an 18-year-old, he's got an unmatched skill, I think. And that's ultimately what it'll come down to.
I gotcha. And that's it for the top 20. And in fact, your top 20. And I got to say, Richard, I really appreciate that you do have some bold opinions there. And it's not all just consensus, drivel that I'm seeing on a lot of other these mock drafts. And I really like, I really like that because the NBA and the NFL draft never go as people expect it to go, right? They don't. And that's one of the reasons that people get so many picks wrong and that the success rate of actually mocking these things correctly is so terrible because people always just base their mock drafts on what they feel the consensus is, but the consensus is never right. So it's really just about starting, doing your own thing here. I want to ask I want to piggyback off that remark there, and I want to kind of I want to let you free range here. My final question before we wrap up here is, who are some of the players that are under the radar right now, maybe might not even be drafted, that throughout your scouting process that you just kind of fell in love with? You just mentioned one in Lewis King, but I'm talking about guys who may be projected to go maybe late second round, maybe even undrafted. But some guys later, some hidden gems you think that you just kind of fell in love with throughout the scouting process that you're going to vouch for on air, and you'll be on the record here. So if one of them hits, you'll look like a genius.
I appreciate you giving me that chance. First, let me just address something that you said, just piggybacking on top of something you said. So, with the consensus, there's a reason the mocks are so off. Everyone's trying to go on consensus. So what I heard I went to the pro basketball combine, which is like a secondary combine for guys that didn't get like the G League camp invites. So they're like, guys that are probably ranked 80 to 100 on a lot of boards, if ranked at all. Right. There were a lot of NBA personnel there, and I asked them, I'm like, what do you think of this draft overall? Like, I've got to know, like, am I crazy? Am I out of touch? And basically they said after Zion, nobody knows what's going to happen. Like, agents don't like this draft at all because they don't know if their guy's going to get drafted. I mean, guys that are projected at 30 or something, who knows if they'll even hear their name called. So it's going to be a wild night. Just embrace for craziness. Guys that are going to be overdrafted, completely underdrafted. There's going to be a lot of that. But for guys I like that I fell in love with for this draft class, the first one, Robert Franks from Washington State. He's a really long shooter to me. Another guy that I think is misplaced in value. So a lot of people, they love Cam Johnson, great shooter with size. So what I see with him is that's it. Really, that's it. Like, that's all he does. He's a pure shooter. Whereas I see Robert Franks, who I haven't seen on anyone's mocks or anything, and I think I had him like in the 40s. But he's a long shooter. He's 6'7" with a 7'3" wingspan. He had a one-man show at Washington, which a lot of times those are the guys that really break out. Decent playmaker, but like I said, it's going to be the size and shooting, but he can do more than just those two things. He can possibly defend, whereas Cam Johnson can't. Not to this isn't supposed to be taking away from Cam Johnson. But yeah, so he's one of them. Another guy, as I mentioned earlier, Kenny Wooden, probably the best shot blocker I've ever seen in college, at least in the last 5 years, because that's all I can think of, recently. But incredible shot blocker. He was from Oregon, played next to Ball for the first 10 games or whatever it was before Ball got hurt, and it was disgusting looking because you can't have two centers just clogging the paint doing the same thing. And so I think he's going to be a steal. He might go undrafted. And then the last guy who I have just who I've really started to like is Charlie Brown Jr., which Great name, first of all. Yeah, very great name. Excellent name. But he's a long wing who he's not the best athlete.
Yeah, we've seen that. We've seen that growing up. I mean, he always misses the football. No, I'm just joking. Go ahead.
So, I mean, that's a good point. I guess, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. But, no, he's a really good player, though. Excellent shot creator, plays with his eyes up. You really don't see wings with his size. I think he's like 6'6", 6'7". Don't quote me on that. But, shot creator, basically plays positionless basketball, defines it. Really, his only flaw I can think of is athleticism. So those are three guys I'm huge on that I haven't seen anything about, especially Charlie. Charlie's like an obscure guy. He went to St. Joseph's. Not a football player. So,
and Richard, first of all, you've killed this. So thanks so much for everything that you're giving us, because this is awesome. And I have one more question for you before we wrap up. So watching the NBA playoffs, is there anything that you take from this year's NBA playoffs that influences how you see these prospects?
Yeah. So the playoffs, I mean, they obviously shape how, the finals winners generally shape how the NBA is constructed for years. I mean, we saw the Warriors kind of eliminate the center position. I think guys like Grant Williams, as much as I'm not that high on him, just because I don't know what he does since half his game is from mid-range, which is kind of dead. I kind of think teams are going to start looking for, everyone went for the next Draymond. Now I think it's Pascal Siakam. Just kind of constructing a team, first of all, with guys like Siakam who can do everything. Really, the Raptors as a whole, they had guys, no one was a one-trick pony or anything. They all were at least two high-level skills. So I think that's generally what teams are going to start looking for. So guys like Cam Johnson, as I mentioned, I really am not trying to roast Cam Johnson. And I apologize if the Pelicans take Cam Johnson, because y'all are not going to want him now. But Cam Johnson, all he does is shoot. So guys like him may slip because of what we saw in the finals where, everyone did something. Even Danny Green, great shooter. Obviously, everyone knows him as a two-way player. But the Raptors as a whole, they don't have anyone who's that one-trick pony. And I think that's going to start to die as everyone has to do at least two things now at a high level. And I think that's what changed this year in the playoffs.
Hey, Richard, you are awesome, man. That's all the time we have today for this podcast. But thank you so much for coming on. We would love to have you on again. Extremely knowledgeable. And we went through the entire top 20, and it sounded like you could have talked all day on this. And it kind of actually reminded me of your passion, actually kind of reminded me of the 3-hour Facebook Live video that I did the night before the NFL draft, where everybody made fun of me for talking so long. No, but you are honestly incredible. And thank you so much for coming on. I'm sure our audience members who are interested in the NBA draft, which is next week, by the way, will have a field day with this podcast. We loved having you on. Folks who are listening to this, make sure you become one of our best friends by subscribing to this podcast and giving us a great rating on iTunes. You can follow us on all social media at Best Podcast NOLA. And we're going to be back next week after the draft. Hey, maybe we'll even have Richard on again to recap the draft. So tell all your friends, hoot at and take flight.